Christopher Pyne, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Graham.
Now, I said in a promo for this show that you are the most outrageous politician I've ever known. And so I want to take you through just two of the outrages that you've perpetrated over the course of the last week or so. First one, the comment about narcissistic egomaniac. We don't need another one. Now, when it comes to Kevin Rudd, let alone Peter Beattie, I'm not going to argue with Kevin Rudd about the egomaniac part. Okay, I won't have a crack at you over that. There may be some evidence. But where's the evidence of narcissism? You explain that to me.
Well, I think the fact that Kevin takes photographs of himself and puts them on Instagram, even with a shaving cut, suggests a certain level of narcissism beyond the norm in politics. Now look, we are a business, Graham, as you would remember, that's full of people who don't mind being the centre of attention. Sometimes even I like to be the centre of attention, but
no.
It's true, it'll come as a shock.
It does.
But I think Kevin Rudd has taken that to a whole new level of narcissism and egomania, which is what drives him, of course, to think that he's the only person who can be the leader of the Labor Party if he's in the federal parliament. I mean, you should talk to some of his former colleagues who used to be leaders when he was a backbencher and then a front bencher. He's been relentless ever since he got there because he has this belief that he's the only person in the Labor Party who's worthy to be the leader. Now, goodness knows how that's going to go with Peter Beattie if Peter Beattie wins.
And hang on, now just a minute. When it comes to Peter Beattie, I've known him for, 30 years or longer, actually. I think a hell of a long time. And he is not an egomaniac, let alone a narcissist. He's definitely not an egomaniac. He never has been.
Who, Peter Beattie?
Peter Beattie. He'd always listen. You could always talk to Peter Beattie. He would always have time for that, and he'd always, if you had a better argument, he'd change his mind. He's always been open to somebody else's view.
Well, he has described himself as a media tart. He's self-described.
Yes, but look, without being rude, and that's just something I'm incapable of. You're a bit of a media tart yourself, really, aren't you? I mean,
no, that's not true.
I never ever can turn on the television without seeing you. Not one night. Do you realise what it's like to know that I'm going to see you every single night? It's a frightening thought.
You'll never get people to accept that view, Graham.
I don't know about that. I could line up a few who'd agree with me there.
I'm a shrinking violet, and everybody knows it. Everybody
really?
knows it. But I'm not even sure Peter Beattie will win, by the way. I remember when Cheryl Kernot was going to sweep all before her in Dixon, and Peter Dutton beat her. The voters don't necessarily warm to celebrity candidates. And
there's a big difference between Peter Beattie and Cheryl Kernot. A big difference. So I think we'll all find out on the day, but I wouldn't be prepared to put too much money on it either way at the moment. It's too early to tell. And the Labor campaign, I'd have to concede, has not been too flash in the first 10 days. Unless it gets better, then you may be right. But what about your second outrage?
Okay.
Your second outrage would be much worse. I mean, this was the showstopper of the campaign, for me anyway, when you were saying that Albo was having a beer with Craig Thompson. And he was doing so that if Craig won the seat, then Albo would be able to do a deal with him to vote with the Labor Party. Now, I reckon I've got a much better chance of Craig Thompson winning his seat of Dobell, and I'm not running. So how did you figure he was going to win?
Well, I think so. You're suggesting that Craig Thompson's got no chance of winning Dobell, but
none whatsoever, and you and I both know it.
But Craig Thompson's got polling, Graham, that shows that he's in front.
Oh, well, Craig Thompson. He also said that his credit card was stolen, his phone was stolen, and everything else was stolen. He's now backed off that. The chances of him having polling, if he got 48%, that would have been only at home. That's because he'd be voting for himself and his wife would still be questioning it. So I just don't think that's right. I think, in fact, I'd be prepared to bet he can't get 1% unless he's first on the ballot paper and gets a donkey. I mean, the reality is, and I know, he's going to get no votes at all. Well, I just want you to just say to me, yes, I may have gone slightly over the top. I just love to hear those words.
Well, Graham, if Anthony Albanese had nothing to feel guilty about, why did he bolt out of there like the Lithgow Flash? He would have given Marjorie Jackson Nelson a run for her money. As soon as he saw the camera, he was out like a shot. Now, if he had nothing to worry about, why didn't he stay there and keep having a drink? I think the truth is Anthony Albanese was obviously talking to Craig Thompson about something, whether it was exchanging preferences or the minority parliament after the election, and whether he'll get Labor's support, or whether it might have even been his how to vote cards. But he was certainly talking to them about something.
I think he was just saying, how are you? I think a lot of people have been worried about Craig Thomson in terms of his personal situation. I don't think they had any business to talk about. But I think if you want to ask why did Anthony bolt, I think he would have worked out when the photograph was being taken that no longer is he a nobody. He's a very well-known face, Anthony. I don't think he understands how well-known he is. But let me take you to a third thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I've got plenty to ask you about tonight. And that concerns the statement you've made twice on my show, that you would definitely not honour any of those Gonski states has signed up. You said, unless there was an overwhelming majority of states. That was your phrase. And I thought you were wrong, but I went back and checked the original statement and you were right. And I always have to concede when I'm wrong and somebody else is right. So overwhelming majority. Now, that didn't happen, and yet you backed off.
Well, Graham, I took the view that it was so long in the school year that it was important to give certainty to school principals, states and territories, the non-government school systems, about their funding from January the 1st next year and for the next 4 years. Of course, we now have 5 jurisdictions that are in the new school funding model out of 8. And also Labor was cutting funding by $325 million over 4 years. It was a smoke and mirrors trick, and I thought Labor needed to be pinged for that. But now, of course, because of all the side arrangements that they've made with the Catholics and the independent schools and various states and territories, they're now putting more money in over the next 4 years. And so I feel comfortable with supporting that school funding model from January the 1st next year to give people certainty, and because it is now an increase in spending, whereas before it was a cut to spending.
Well, I've got to say, though, I mean, if it was about timing, I think you actually backed off about 2 weeks after you said you wouldn't on my show, so there wasn't much difference, was there?
Well, things move very quickly in politics.
A week's
Graham.
A long time, they say, don't they?
And so is a morning. Things move very quickly, and we formed the view that we needed to act, and I wanted to do that, and Tony Abbott agreed, and we made the announcement, and then, of course, the election was called. So it seemed to be on the eve of the election, but let's not forget that Kevin Rudd was playing ducks and drakes about when the election was going to be called, so we were all left in the dark.
Well, I think that's normal. Prime Ministers don't ever tell you when they're going to do it. There's only one who ever tried that, and look what happened to her. Now, can I move on? Why is Kevin Rudd, backing off and saying he had a dad moment over this remark that a candidate had sex appeal? Because I can see nothing whatsoever wrong with it.
Well, Graham, a lot of people have been wanting to say that you have sex appeal for years.
They have. Look, I get that daily, but it's just something
exactly.
I endure.
And we don't want people to be frightened off being able to tell you that they think that you have sex appeal.
Good. So, excellent.
But I think Labor is desperately trying to flick the switch to vaudeville. They're having a poor campaign. Kevin Rudd looks and sounds rattled. And let's not forget they ran a vicious personal campaign against Campbell Newman in Queensland, which was a mistake. And of course we saw the result there. Because Labor doesn't have any positive agenda or plan for the future, they're now resorting to what we knew they would do, which is to run a very personal campaign against Tony Abbott.
But what about the one you're running against Rudd? Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. I've been watching the telly. I've been seeing the ads. They just bucket Rudd hour after hour. In fact, much more than that, sadly. I'm seeing so many of those ads. That's all I've seen so far is a bucket on Rudd. How is it that he's running some vicious personal attack and you're not?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, the ads that we're running on Kevin Rudd are about the facts of his record. And so you can't dispute those. You can't say that's a negative campaign. It's a facts campaign.
Well, I can say it's not a positive one.
It's
Do
a
you mind if I say that?
And the second thing is, apart from us running a facts campaign, is that Kevin Rudd said that we all had to play nice in the sandpit. Kevin Rudd said when he became PM that he was going to be a positive Prime Minister. In fact, Graham, he said he'd instructed George Wright, the Federal Director of the Labor Party, not to do any negative campaign against anyone in the coalition because they were going to run a very positive campaign. Of course, that wasn't true. Like most of the things that Kevin Rudd says, they turn out to be broken promises and half-truths. They've been running a vicious smear campaign on Tony Abbott, and it will continue because Labor has nothing left.
Break. You're both doing it. Both sides are into the negative campaigning at 100 mile an hour. We both know that. You know it and I know it. Now, I know you've got to follow a line, but to some extent, you've just got to make some sort of concession that that's what happens in campaigns, because it does. Anyway, I'm not going to argue with you about it, because I know you've got a line you've got to stick to, and and it's a campaign and you can't budge. But I'm not finished yet. What about Tony Abbott's statement that we would see your costings, and I use the phrase exactly as he said, well before the election? How do you define well before? Is it 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 days? What is it?
Well, it certainly won't be the night before the election like Labor in 2007, Graham, where they took the Australian public for mugs and published their costings.
And when
at
did
5
you do yours
PM.
in 2010?
I can't remember that.
I think it was the Thursday.
I was
so you gave 2 days, but I'd like to tell you, what's well before? Is it more than 2 days?
I was fighting for my political life in 2010, Graham, so I don't remember.
Rubbish.
But
you were never going to get beaten.
We will give...
Never.
We will give the public fair time to view our budget position.
Well, I'm just trying to find out what's fair time. I'm trying to work out what all this means.
Well, we're still waiting for the Parliamentary Budget Office to come back to us with a few costings of our policies. We're thoroughly going through the PFO to see how that impacts on our costings, and of course
but it's
that's
virtually
changed.
the same as what Bowen said the previous Friday, so there's not much change.
I must admit, Graham, being lectured by the Labor Party on fiscal responsibility is like Hannibal Lecter lecturing me on vegetarianism. And
it must be an Adelaide disease, this quest for the best analogy. You and Amanda Vanstone, you come up with them all the time.
Well, we will release our costings. We will do it well before the night before the election, unlike the Labor Party in 2007.
Well, what's well before? Is that a week before? What is it, 2 weeks? I mean,
well,
when is it?
We've still got 3.5 weeks to go.
Correct. So when is well before?
So we'll give people all the time they need to view our fiscal responsibility.
How much time do they need?
But the people know, Graham, by the way, that the Coalition is going to be better to manage the budget than Labor because they saw the Howard Costello era, where we finished it with a surplus budget, with money in the bank, with no debt, no deficit, and they've seen the last 6 years of Labor.
One thing's for sure, though, and the one thing I've got watching this campaign, I found myself very reluctantly writing a column last Friday being nostalgic for the Howard era, bringing him back, because I thought
I saw that column.
These two leaders are just nowhere near that standard. So it's no good telling me what Howard and Costello did. They're not there.
Well, Graham, the other thing about that column that surprised me was that you said, well, the real Kevin Rudd, the great campaigner, stand up. But I've never known Kevin Rudd to be a great campaigner. He was tossed out by his own party in 2010 because he was so unpopular, and his popularity in this campaign has gone from stratospheric heights 5 weeks ago to a poll, the Morgan poll published today, had him only 3 points ahead of Tony Abbott as the preferred PM. In 1996,
none of that answers what's happening on your side. And I wouldn't want to be rude, but you do seem to be running a negative campaign right now on Kevin Rudd. Would you say that's fair?
I thought we'd moved on from our costings. That's why
I thought you'd moved on from the negative campaign. You told me you weren't going to have one.
I'm running a facts campaign.
Oh, there's a facts campaign.
And the facts are that...
how come you didn't give the fact that in 2007, Kevin Rudd campaigned very, very well and John Howard lost his own seat? I mean, you can't deny that. He was very good at the time. He was. In
2007, Graham, the public wanted a change, and Kevin Rudd or anybody who led the Labor Party was going to win that election. But I remember...
you will concede nothing, will you? Nothing.
In 1996...
You are unbelievable. And look, I've got to leave it there because they're giving me a wind-up signal. I just got to say, once again, you are an absolute outrage, Christopher Pyne, but I'm really glad you came on the show, and I hope we can talk again before the election.
It's always good to talk to you, Graham.
Good on you, Christopher. Thank you. We'll be back in just a moment.